We're here today with Rodney K. Raines. He was born on May the 6th, 1939. Served in the Army. Achieved the rank of Specialist 5, E5. We're recording this at Troy, Ohio, at American Legion Post 43. And my name is Phil Marshall.
Born.
And I have with me Jay Wackler and Bill Woolery. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. So Rodney, I'd like for you to start. You prefer Rod, I assume?
Rod.
Okay. I'd like for you to start where you were born, your family details, what you were doing before you became a member of the service, and other family members that were in the military. So if you could start us off there, please.
Well, my name is Rod Raines. I was born May 6, 1939, Walton, West Virginia. Private residence. The doctor came out and delivered me, and it's been interesting since then. Grew up in that area, Walton, Roane County, West Virginia. I went to grade school and high school there in Walton. Graduated from Walton High School in 1957. Was a pretty good athlete and was lucky enough, I guess, to get a college scholarship to baseball, which I went off to West Virginia. Played baseball there, graduated West Virginia in 1962. Played 4 years of baseball, played all over the South, played Clemson, Army, Navy, Citadel. Was planning to make left-handed pitcher.
Cool.
Interestingly enough, I had 5 no-hitters while I was in high school. Attracted a little attention and for college ball, and actually I went to spring training as well. Went to spring training with the Detroit Tigers in Lakeland, Florida, and spent some time there. And interesting enough, my first visit to Dayton, Ohio ever was I was assigned by Detroit to travel with the Charleston Senators for 2 weeks, which they were AA professional baseball team at that time. Charleston Senators. They were a Detroit farm club. But being picked up and attached to them and pitching some batting practice along the way, we made a road trip. And that road trip in the league at that time with Charleston was Dayton, Indianapolis, Toledo, Grand Rapids, Saginaw, Muskingum, and I believe Richmond, Virginia. Probably missed 1 or 2. But we made trips, I know Saginaw and Grand Rapids and Dayton, Ohio. And we played at Dayton, and I never even, it was just another place. Played at the old Mud Hen Field or something like that out at the VA Center. 15 years later, I'm back in Dayton. I think, oh, this place looks familiar. And I had played baseball out there. It's part of the VA cemetery now. They've cut that corner out. It used to be a baseball stadium there. Interesting enough how your life kind of comes back to bite you once in a while.
Goes around.
But I played college baseball, had every intention of going on with baseball. That didn't happen. I met the lady of my life in my senior year in college. We got married. Baseball became kind of second thing for me during that period of time, and actually I had to graduate from college to get a job. Got a job, and that job happened to be with Meade Corporation here in Dayton, Ohio. Was very happy with that. Came to Dayton, and I thought, what a beautiful place it was. In early 1962, and they had just completed a new section of the airport at that time. It was brand new runways, brand new building, and they had just, I found this out 10 years later, they had just completed I-75 from the Vandalia exit to downtown. And here I am riding into town on a taxi thinking, man, what a beautiful place Dayton, Ohio is. Interviewed with Meade Corporation. They gave me a job offer and hired me. Moved here in June of '62. Well, interestingly enough, about the 1st of October of 1962, I get this nice little greeting card. Said, would you show up and interview for, an appointment with your
Greetings.
greetings. I got an appointment with the United States Army. I wound up getting drafted. I actually got drafted out of West Virginia, Roane County, West Virginia, and wound up in Weirton, West Virginia, and was inducted there on October 16th of 1962. Well, more than most of you all recall, October 16th, actually 13th through the 20th, was a very interesting time in our history. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
Well, when I got on the train in Weirton in civilian clothes, wound up in Washington, D.C. on the train. Everything was very exciting. Places running all over the place, and there were soldiers everywhere. And I'm thinking, I can't hardly wait. This is going to be exciting, all this activity.
But you weren't aware of the crisis yet.
I had no clue that,
Okay.
the Russians were about to nuke us. I wound up in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I suppose they sent me there to go to basic. But after 4 or 5 days running around civilian clothes in Fort Jackson, and there were jeeps and trucks and tanks and all kind of things running everywhere at Fort Jackson, they finally gave us a haircut and some GI clothes. And the next thing I know, I was on the bus to Fort Gordon, Georgia for basic training.
Basic training at Fort.
And went through basic training, finished basic training in December of 62. Turned right around and went to Fort Benning for 6 weeks for advanced infantry training. Lo and behold, after we finished that, they sent me off to Fort Lewis, Washington in an artillery unit. As it turned out, I wound up with the headquarters and headquarters battery of 23rd Artillery Group, which was a brand new startup outfit. And we knew from day one that we were programmed to go to Vietnam as a regular fighting unit. And so I was just another trooper there. They had assigned me to the Commo division of the unit. In the Commo division, you start at the. In this case, we had self-propelled artillery vehicles. We would go from there out to string about 100 yards away a telephone wire where we could get azimuths and things like that for our direction people. And my job was to run the wire from the tank out to this place and hook it up.
Now,
So
at
we
this
had-
time, you were still advisors, or were you combat troops?
We were just out of basic training. I had no
But
idea
I mean,
what
when
I
you
was
went to
at the time.
Vietnam, okay, you're not in Vietnam yet.
No,
Oh,
we're
okay.
we're just at the unit at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay.
One day we were on field duty, and I was assigned to the supply room to count field jackets because I was an accounting major. I could count, up to 10 maybe. So I was in helping the supply sergeant with inventory, and in walks, as it turns out, an E9. Looked like his fatigues were painted on him. He was the straightest soldier to this day that I've ever met. His name was Shrapsinski, Sergeant Major Shrapsinski. He comes into the supply room in a booming voice. He says, "Is there a reins in this outfit?" And I'm ready to dive under the table and say, I'd never seen anybody like him before. I was ready to disappear. And Supply Sergeant says, "That's reins right over there." The next thing you know, I was sitting in the colonel's office about 2 blocks away. And I had no idea why I was there. Absolutely none.
What was the date of this, Rod?
This would have been March, April of 63. Colonel says, "Well, young man, I'm looking at your resume, and it looks to me like you played baseball at West Virginia." And I said, "Well, yes, sir." And I'm thinking 6th Army baseball. Oh, I'm going to get to play baseball for the Army. Yes. And he says, "Well, it's a very interesting resume. Tell me about your baseball career at West Virginia." So I started chatting a little bit with him about West Virginia and some of the games we played and what have you. He said, "Did you know a gentleman by the name of Elvis Starr?" He says, "Tell me what you know about Elvis Starr." And I'm thinking, well, Elvis Starr's my commander-in-chief, because he had been named, a gentleman by the name of Elvis Starr was the Department of Defense Secretary of the Army for the Department of Defense. And I didn't know whether to answer him informally or formally. He says, "No, tell me about how you know Elvis Starr." I said, "Well, I know Elvis Starr from being at his home, the president's home at West Virginia University, and in the back of his car going to the baseball games. He was a big baseball fan." And okay, so at the end of that conversation is that this commander, his name was Geiger. He was on the list for Brigadier General. Had worked directly for Elvis Starr, Secretary of the Army. And I had, Elvis Starr was president of my university. That was my connection with Elvis Starr through baseball. And the end shot of this was I became the colonel's driver because of this connection. And further connection is Elvis Starr had played college baseball at, I believe, not Colgate, maybe, yes, at Colgate. John Kennedy had played baseball, our president and commander-in-chief had played baseball at Harvard. They knew each other, both very rich families. And Elvis Starr, my colonel saw my name and my references to the university, and he called Elvis Starr and vice versa, and how it ever happened. But anyway, my name came up, and lo and behold, I'm the colonel's driver.
There you go.
That's better than playing baseball, wasn't
It
it?
was better, well, it was boring, but better than playing baseball. My job was to keep his Jeep, and he had a Jeep, and he had a deuce, a 3/4 ton fixed up so he could go camping, when we went out on maneuvers. He could go out and use his 3/4 ton just to hang around. And he had a 1.5 deuce fixed up almost like an Airstream. It had everything, It had an onboard heater on the back and the whole works. Well, I had to drive all that equipment for him. So I spent my time being the colonel's driver and fiddling my thumbs most of the time, and dealing with the Sergeant Strapczynski, who was still the sharpest soldier I'd ever met. Bless his soul. I'm sure he's gone today, but he was a good soldier, earned his pay. Got drafted, had to leave my family at home. I was married in my senior year in college, and she stayed back in West Virginia while I was in the service. Actually, she came out later. Came into the office one Monday morning, was called into the colonel's office, and he says, "Young man, you have good news and bad news." I said, "Okay, whichever comes first." He says, "Well, effective this coming Monday, you're going to be at Fort Benning, Georgia." I said, "Okay, why?" They sent me through Special Forces training. I'm thinking all this time, even whenever I would finish Special Forces training, that our unit was on the way to Vietnam. They were sending me to Special Forces school to protect him. So I would come back to the unit, be his driver. We transitioned to Vietnam, and life goes on happily ever after. I get out and do my thing and get away from the Army. Well, it didn't happen exactly that way. When I got out of Special Forces training, got back in the unit, I did report back to my unit, and 3 days later I was in San Francisco, and 6 days later I was in Far East, and spent 7 months, almost a total of 8 months in the Far East, doing classified information.
Far East meaning Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
yes. And from there, I came back to the unit.
Just put the time here, then-
I found out 40 years later
Well,
that none of this shows up in any of my records. Nothing has ever been reported about it.
Your 8 months.
That I was at Fort Lewis, Washington the entire time. According to my records, I spent time in Yakima, Washington on maneuvers. I spent time in a lot of places that, interesting places.
Yeah.
Some of them I've been and some of them I haven't,
Which you don't care to expound on.
and can't.
Okay, all right.
I can say that I got experienced in one area. I grew up in West Virginia, learned to hunt, and learned to be quiet in the woods, and a lot of good things that helps you with special forces training. But when we got to our assignment in the Far East, I found an interesting little thing that I had never even thought about before. We had a smokeless fire. We could build a fire and there would be no smoke come out of the top, out the chimney. That's so the natives wouldn't find out where we were. Interesting.
Yep.
I'd never thought,
I'm sure you learned a lot.
that was a brand new thing to me.
Yeah.
Being a college graduate, yet, you thought you knew everything. When the day you graduated college, I knew it all. I come to find out you don't know it all.
So,
Well, the end result of all of that is I did not get the opportunity to play college or service baseball. I did play, but it was, minor. We had a few games.
Just recreational more than
recreational,
anything.
exactly.
yeah.
In October '65, I get out of the United States Army, come back to Meade Corporation in Dayton, Ohio, and go back to work as an accountant. 30 years later, I'm at Arlington National Cemetery. It was I may be wrong on the date, but it was the weekend that they opened the Air Force Memorial in D.C. And my sister and brother-in-law who lived there, and I and a friend go down to see the Air Force Memorial and the Marine Corps Memorial and Arlington. I had never really spent an appreciable amount of time in Arlington, but we went to the John Kennedy grave and we went to the mansion and revisited a lot of the old generals and things. As we're about ready, we spent 4 hours there, and as we're about ready to leave and go down by the visitor center, I happened to look over, and here was a granite memorial, had to be 20 foot long and probably 5 foot high, solid granite. And it had written across it in huge letters, Geiger. And I'm thinking, whether that has anything to do with my guy. I knew that he was a West Point graduate. So I said, Les, it's my sister, hang on a second, I've got to go jump the fence and see what this is all about. I went to look at the memorial, the huge piece of granite. On the back side was all kind of lettering. Major General Roy S. Geiger II, Commander, Guadalcanal. And of course my jaw dropped 6 inches. The guy that was my commander was his son. And adding back to the equation, that had a great role to do with why I was selected back then as his driver. When I got back home from D.C. from that visit, I went on the internet, looked up a Roy S. Geiger, found one in Duluth, Georgia, called him, and he says, hello, and I said, hey, is this, I called him Colonel Geiger. He says, well, yes, it is, retired Colonel Geiger. Who's this? I said, this is Raines, your driver. He says, the hell you say, I had 30 drivers, which one are you? I said, I'm the one from West Virginia. And Elvis Starr recommended me to you. He says, oh my God, it's been so long since I've heard from you. He says, where are you? And I told him I'm in Dayton, Ohio. He says, what do you do? I said, I do insurance work. And he says, will you ever come this way? And I said, well, yes, annually, pretty much annually, we come to Florida. He says, well, the next time you're coming through, you've got to stop and we'll play some golf. Well, by this time, the guy's 80 years old, belongs to the country club, retired, belongs to the country club. So that fall, I go down to visit with the guy. And sure enough, come to find out, his father was the Guadalcanal commander. And if you look at the very famous picture of the signature on the Missouri of us accepting the Japanese surrender, his father is two people to the right of General MacArthur in that picture. So that's Roy S. Geiger, Commander Guadalcanal. And my guy, by the way, still hits the ball right down the middle, right up on the green, 2 putts. Business is over, we go to the next hole. And here I am hitting the ball out to the right and hitting the ball out to the left, all this stuff.
You're getting the tour.
I'm getting the tour.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had a very nice week together. I haven't talked to him much since then, but he had memorabilia all over the place, including
I'm sure.
he went to grade school, my guy went to grade school at Kaiser in Dayton, Ohio, because his dad was one of the original Marine Corps pilots in the 1909, 10, 11 era. And my guy went to grade school here. You know, Daddy was stationed at Wright Pat Air Force Base. And so my guy went to grade school here in Dayton. He had never, ever mentioned, we ran around Fort Lewis, Washington, probably 5,000 miles in the Jeep. He never ever said a word about Dayton, Ohio, all that time.
Yeah.
And all that time he knew that I was from Dayton, baseball, Elvis Starr. He
Right.
knew all this stuff and never said a word.
Never mentioned it.
Interesting baseball, or
Yeah.
interesting war stories
Yeah.
for me.
Well, so when you got out of the service then, you just kind of melded back into the civilian life?
Came back to Dayton, Ohio, got back to my old job as an accountant, auditor,
Right.
internal auditor for Meade Corporation. Had a very nice job with Meade. It wasn't my best job offer out of college, but it was a very nice job. And interestingly enough, I found out some things that they had hired some guys, some new college kids coming in at a higher base salary than I was making coming back from the service. I went to my boss and laid it on the line that I deserved to make at least as much as they do. Well, it kind of put us on the wrong foot. I got my raise, but on the other hand, I figured out my life was kind of short-circuited with Meade Corporation. And interesting enough, about the time that I had gone to the shrink, to the headhunters, to begin to look for a job, I met a fellow by the name of Rollin Schuster. He was general agent for an insurance company here in town. And he had played baseball with Ted Williams
Wow.
in Boston.
Right.
And of course, when we made that acquaintance, then, I was all ears. So the next thing you know, over about a half a dozen martinis, I had decided to go into the insurance business. As a trainer and as a marketing guy, not as a salesman, trainer. Well, after about 6 months in the insurance industry, I figured out that the only way to make any real money was to be a salesman. So that's how I arrived at the career that Mr. Shook knows about very well in the insurance business. I spent 40 years in the insurance business, and one of the few guys that made it 40 years on their own. So I had a very nice insurance career. Retired in 2006. You had a question?
Yeah, like I say, do you think your military career helped you with your civilian career?
Considerably, yes.
But you had to think about it.
Well, in respect to a lot of things, you learn things in the military that are seat of the pants things that you can't learn in books. You can't learn from people. You learn from interaction with people. and I had a full dose of that. Interrelating with 15 other guys for 6 months, and you never saw anything except a chopper come over and drop your supplies once a week and maybe a letter here and there, and that's all you see. And then that teaches you some things, some life stories. I went into the service making $19 a month, and wound up, I think the best pay I got was $390 a month. But interesting enough, I wouldn't trade those 3 years for anything that I've ever done. It's just simply that way.
How did your family react to your military time? Are they supportive?
I had a very passive family. My dad was drafted during World War II, but he happened to be, the day he got his draft notice, he happened to be in Bisbee, Arizona, working for the War Department during 1941. And I didn't know it at the time. I was 2 years old. Some scurrying around, he got deferred. So in all respect, he got deferred from any activity during World War II, except he worked for I believe he worked for the Navy Department in World War II, during World War II, building bases, including what we know today as Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Fort Huachuca was built as a secret signals base, signals communication for the Army and other branches of the service during World War II. And interestingly enough, Fort Huachuca was the place that they taught the Indian Code during World War II in the Saipan and Tarawa and Okinawa attacks. We used Indian Code,
The Navajo Code Talkers.
Navajo Code Talkers,
Yeah.
to complete those missions. That was all done and taught at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. My dad helped build that base right out of the desert.
Yeah.
Because I remember being there when driving by that place when I was 3 years old, and it looked like cactus. And I was there, interestingly enough, in the probably the mid '80s on a vacation trip. Drove by, and they let us go right. I showed, actually I showed my VFW lifetime membership card. They let us right in the base.
Yeah.
We went to the base, looked all around, and of course it's growing up into a city these days.
Of course. Yeah.
I took those pictures back that next Christmas time to visit my parents, and surprised, my dad and mom thought that my wife and I were in New Orleans for a conference. Actually, we were in New Orleans, but then after New Orleans, we went to Scottsdale, Arizona, and spent a week. And after Scottsdale, we went south to Nogales and Bisbee, Arizona, and visited this base, and visited actually found an old home where I lived, where I was like 4 years old. Took pictures all over the place. And that fall, we presented Mom and Dad with a scrapbook with these pictures. And Dad was about 3 or 4 pages into it, and he says, "This looks familiar." And about halfway through, he says, This is an Army base." I said,
Yeah.
"Yep, it is." He says, and I said, "You probably built that building." He says, "Where is this?" I said, "It's in Fort Huachuca." And I thought he was going to faint.
Yeah.
He thought it was very interesting. I always thought it was interesting that I could even get on base.
Yeah.
But they just
Yeah.
waved me right on through like I was a full-fledged,
You looked official.
ready to be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember we had rented a little Volkswagen, yellow, lemon-colored Volkswagen Beetle to do that little Southwest tour down along the Mexican border, and had a very nice vacation with all that.
So it sounds like you have no regrets about your military time, or few regrets, maybe.
At the time, I thought to myself it was worthless to have a well-educated, capable, athletic guy like me in there doing all that ground pounding work, and for nothing. They could have gotten anybody to be the colonel's driver. But when I reflect on it 20, 30, 40 years away, it was the best time I ever spent. doing anything. It was meant to be, and I'll have to say that I was an awfully good soldier.
Yeah.
I was spit and polish guy from day one. The first day that we got to basic training, the drill sergeant calls me out and he says, "Son, you're my squad commander." And he calls out another guy. He says, "You're my second squad commander." And I wound up being the squad leader of Company 1 of
Yeah.
the basic training unit.
Yeah.
And there was some interesting experiences there, but we made it through.
Yeah.
We made it through. Met some interesting guys in basic training.
Anything else you care to add?
First, one of the guys that was a real good friend of mine in basic training was a guy by the name of Steve Parrish from Homestead, Florida. Had never seen snow. Had no idea what snow was all about. Well, when we left basic training in March, or advanced training in March, we flew into Chicago, and they had 36 inches of snow in Chicago. We left there and went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or somewhere in that area, and they had 8 feet of snow at the Oshkosh airport. And this guy, and at 8 feet of snow, by the time you plow the runway, is the snowbank's high as this building.
Sure.
And this guy was same as the wing level on the airplane. And this guy was looking out the window with eyes just looked like saucers. And he says, "My God, I hope we're not going to be training in this." Well, we went to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is the same, height in the United States, but it's a lot more temperate climate.
Yeah, a lot milder. Yeah.
Along the ocean there in Fort Lewis. So we had a nice time there at Fort Lewis. Fort Lewis was a beautiful base. Unfortunately, we knew at the time that was the kickoff station for guys that were going to be going to Vietnam, because we knew if you paid any attention to anything in the 1961-62 era, you knew that we were on our way to Vietnam, to Southeast Asia somewhere. I escaped through all that with thankfulness, because I didn't really have to do any combat. I didn't do any foxhole work. I was trained highly in order to do that sort of thing, but never had to. I was always on special duty of some kind. It's pretty much my service career. I spent the last 40 years doing my insurance business was my career. Spent a considerable amount of my time doing service work, including I'm past president of 3 different Optimus clubs. I'm past president of 3 different Lions clubs. I'm past president of both the Vandalia President's Club and the Dayton President's Club. The Dayton President's Club is an organization of service club past presidents. Paul and Bob would know about that organization. So I've spent a career considerably interlaced with community service, and I'm proud of that.
Bob, is there anything else that you
Retired now
care to ask?
and living
No, I
happily
think
ever
that's
after.
about it.
Oh, I'd like to mention also that I have a daughter, Amy, who is a major. I'm sorry, she's lieutenant colonel now in the Marine Corps,
Excellent.
a career officer. Went through Quantico. She had something like 38 girls, females, enter her class of 250 in OCS at Quantico. 2 finished, including my daughter.
Wow.
I'm proud of that.
So what does she do now? What's her duty?
She is on active duty with the Marine Corps, and she's doing classified work.
I was just going to ask her, are you going to tell me she's not allowed to talk about it?
She's at Scott Air Force Base
Okay.
near St. Louis.
Yep.
The closest she's been to home since she's been in the Marine Corps. By the way, she's a Texas A&M graduate.
Aggie.
She's an Aggie through and through.
Yeah.
My son was, my daughter right now is 46. No, that's not correct. My daughter is 42, my son is 36. My son is a graduate in graduated Vandalia Butler in 94, graduated United States Military Academy, I'm sorry, United States Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, in 1998. He's now a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, stationed in Colorado Springs. And I'm very proud of both of them.
Little sibling rivalry there to see which one can attain rank first?
A lot of sibling rivalry. None of it has anything to do with Dad, because Dad never ever really talked up Army about anything. But my son got an appointment with the Air Force Academy, and my daughter was interested in the Marine Corps through her ROTC connection at Texas A&M, and of course Texas A&M is the military school.
Right.
So she got interested in doing something, and so she wound up in the Marine Corps. Very good. And they're very happy with their careers, and
Well, I'm sure.
I hope that we can keep our United States military cadre together long enough for them to be able to retire from the military and live happily ever after. So
Okay.
that's pretty
All
much
right.
my story to date.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Veterans History Project, thanks for your service, and thanks for your time today for the interview.
Proud to serve. I'll mention that I'm a life member of VFW, a life member of the American Legion, Vandalia Post. I'm a life member of the Wilmington Avenue Post 9927 of the VFW.
What do you do with your spare time, both minutes?
Work the Sudoku that this guy.
Me too. Do it every day.
10 years ago.
Do it every day.